Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are David Koel, Principal in Charge, and Shawn Pauly, Project Architect from Cushing, Terrell, with offices in, Montana, Colorado, Idaho, Louisiana, Minnesota, Texas, and Washington. Design Principal David Koel seeks to inspire creativity on projects with clients and by orchestrating teams to harness their talents while meeting the tangible needs of project scope and budget. Through his collaborative approach, David brings clients into the design process to arrive at more meaningful design solutions. Shawn Pauly is a project architect with specific expertise in education and government markets. Through this work, he has become adept at stakeholder engagement, consensus and relationship building, and construction administration for large, impactful projects, such as campus master planning, sports facilities, performance halls, theatrical spaces, courthouses, and emergency services facilities, among many others. The project we are going to talk about today is the Flathead Valley Community College, Pauly Wachholz College Center in Kalispell, Montana. The Wachholz College Center is a 67,000 square foot facility that combines two distinct venues into one stunning building on the Flathead Valley Community College campus. The goal of the project was to meld two programs that are usually separate, and I mean they are really usually separate, performing arts and athletics, into one grand facility. The project theme: music in motion. Now, let's get into the details. Hello, everybody. My guests today are David Koel, Principal in Charge, and Shawn Pauly, Project Architect at Cushing, Terrell, with offices in, hold on, I got to take a breath for this, Montana, Colorado, Idaho, Louisiana, Minnesota, Texas, and Washington. Am I missing any?
I think you got it.
Got it. Good. Yeah. David and Shawn, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
Doing great. Thank you. Excited to be here. Yeah.
So we all know that at times in this business, especially during deadlines or during the construction phase, working in this industry can sometimes require really long hours, especially when you get around deadlines. We've all done it at one point or another, and some stress. There's challenges in any project. So my question for both of you is, what do you do for fun? What do you do to unwind and help maintain some balance in the way that our, kind of roller coaster stress and deadline kind of life that we live in this industry?
Work-life balance. Yeah. It's a tough one, but it's Montana, so there's any number of millions of things we could do for fun. I hail from Minnesota. I grew up in Minnesota, and so I love bird hunting, duck and goose and pheasants, and I got a good bird dog, and the kids are starting to enjoy these sort of things, and so I like to get out. I like to get outdoors, and that's kind of my battery recharge. I think I've got a reputation in the office for being the one guy that chases feather instead of fur. Here in Montana, it's everybody's elk, right? And that's the big target, and I love that too. But I think I have an affinity for birds, the ducks, the geese, something about going out there with the dog and having this companion. We just are synergetic. We do our thing. It's and anytime you're outside, right? It's hard to beat that. So that's rejuvenating.
I get that. How about you, David?
Well, earlier we were talking about whiskey, so I think that's the solution for me. Always has been. Actually, that is true, but at the same time, Shawn's right. We live in a glorious state. The Glacier National Park is at our doorstep. If you haven't been here, you should check it out. It is a phenomenal national park. we go in there a lot. We'll do a lot of hiking. In fact, I proposed to my wife on top of a mountain in Glacier National Park. That's how important that park is. So that is how we. That's how we deal with stress. Hiking.
It sounds like a great. I mean, we've got lots of great outdoors in Oregon too. Montana's been on my bucket list forever, and for whatever reason, I've been a lot of different places, but for whatever reason, I still haven't made it to Montana. And I mean, I would love to see that. And Glacier National Park, of course, is one of the places that I'd want to see if I can.
Yeah.
But I think the best is take the whiskey to Glacier National Park, and you've got
it all
covered.
Yeah. Put it in a flask and go up a summit. Yeah,
that is right. I like
that whiskey thing's been. Yeah, it's been a new hobby for me, the whiskey thing, and trying unique and different kinds of whiskeys. And yeah, I don't know that it's a really smart hobby, but it's a lot of fun.
David, you're quite the mountaineer. You've done a good job of getting up in that park and spending some time in that.
Yeah.
That's good for you. I envy that. I should make a point of getting up there more.
Well, that's one of the reasons we moved here, honestly, was that. We didn't even move here because of Cushing, Terrell, or architecture. We moved here because of adventure, to be honest with you. Just turns out the firm's a pretty good place to work as well. That turns out. But yeah, we spent a lot of time climbing mountains in that park. It's really, it is a great place to just get away from everybody, enjoy nature. Probably more information you want to know. You can always edit this out. But it's I think one of the best parts of hiking, by the way, in that park is, you do come in contact potentially with, animals that are higher on the food chain. They just are. And so there's this risk. There is always this little risk, and that's part of the joy of it. And maybe even the addiction to it is the fact there's a little risk you might actually bump into something that could eat you, kind of fun. Rarely though. My mom used to always worry about me hiking by myself. And she would say, "Oh, David, you can't do that. You might get eaten by a grizzly." And I had to remind her, and this is the truth as far as I know. Statistically, I'm more apt to die in a car crash on the way to the trailhead than I am to be eaten by a grizzly bear. So I had to remind her of that, which of course didn't make her feel any better. That is the truth of it. So anyway.
Well, if you think about, because I know I have a really difficult time disconnecting from work completely, especially with our phones and everything. If you're up in the mountains and having to pay attention to whether something higher on the food chain is about to have you for lunch, it's a really good way to make sure you don't think about work and truly disconnect. That and the phones probably don't work up there.
Not well.
Forceful, unplug.
You got it.
Before we get into the project specifics, I like to start with a little background or history on the project. Like, why is this project here? What was the motivation for the client to have this college center in the first place?
I can start with that if you like, Shawn.
Yeah, David, this is your wheelhouse.
I try, I think the motivation was that the client recognized, or the school recognized, that the Valley really hasn't, I think the biggest performance hall or the best venue up until this point was maybe a 350 seat high school auditorium and it's an old one, probably from the 60s, if not earlier. So the recognition that we just were ready, the Valley was ready for a fine arts center, impeccable acoustics. That was the impetus for this. And Jane Cherise is her name. She's the president of Flathead Valley Community College, and she sort of had the vision to put this in motion. And I think it was a brilliant vision. She also realized that athletics didn't really exist on campus in any meaningful way. And so the thinking in her mind was, let's put together a college center that includes a 1,000-seat fine arts, so essentially triples or more capacity that we currently have. And then combine that with athletics component, which is a large gymnasium and other things, to sort of put it all together in a college center for the students, but also for the community. And I think that was the impetus for the center itself.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned, not a venue in the valley like this, right? But I think it goes even beyond that, because if anybody knows anything about Kalispell, if you've been here, I mean, we are the very tip corner of Northwest Montana. We are almost Canada and almost Idaho, and we're in the mountains, and we are a pretty remote pocket. So I think this venue is pretty impressive for a very large region that doesn't have anything like this in anywhere around, right? And it just takes some travel time to get anywhere out here, right? So to have one now in our backyard is just, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I didn't warn you about me going down rabbit holes, but I'm going to go through first question, and I'm already going down a rabbit hole. I mentioned to you guys before we started this recording that I worked on schools for years. So, and I don't know if it's different in Montana, but in Oregon, for a school, any kind of public school at any level, to have the funding to be built, they have to pass bond issues. And that comes out of property tax dollars. Being Montana, just in general, not being hugely populated, was it difficult for them to get the funding they needed to build the center?
Well, it was actually entirely private funds for this project. It was all donations, which is pretty remarkable. That is uncommon. There may have been some loans at the end, and Shawn, maybe you know more about them than I do, but my recollection, this is all private. And that's one amazing thing about Jane. She is just really, really good at connecting, and really, really good at getting out there. And so this is not the first time she's done this. Major projects on the campus have all been driven by private donations. And so I think it was Paul Wachholz who donated. He got his name on the building. And so he was the guy who really kind of set it in motion. And then a lot of people followed. So, yeah, no bonding required.
That is
cool.
Yeah.
Flippin' amazing.
I know.
That is not I did not expect to get that answer. That is totally and completely out of the ordinary. Wow. Yeah. Color me impressed.
You're right, Cherise. And a lot of the work I do is education based, and it is passing bonds, for the local schools through the state and that sort of thing, right? And that's the funding mechanism. So it is really impressive. I don't think it's worth highlighting it again, right? How actually impressive it is. Jane, crew over there at FVCC, the community college, the local community college, they do such an amazing job. They have the way that they entrench themselves in the community and give back. It's obviously reciprocated. It's a wonderful mutual synergy we have in the community. We're lucky for it, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the other thing popping up in my head, in the whole process of passing bond issues. You see a lot of people that are really up. I don't want my property taxes to go up. I don't want to pay for any more things. But that, just besides the fact that it's impressive that anybody pulled off something like that and got all those private dollars to do it, it also says a whole lot about your community there. That's not small dollars. We're not talking about raising, $20,000 to, fix a concession booth in the football stand or whatever. That's big money.
No.
So that says a lot about the support they have from the community.
So, absolutely.
Which is not. I knew this was going to be a good interview. Okay, so
you're right.
That question leads right into the first thing that grabbed me the second I started reading about this project. This building involves two very, very diverse primary spaces under one roof. Not two spaces that almost any intelligent human being would put under one roof, just saying. So you have a performing arts center and a family event center that includes a gymnasium. So I need to hear a little bit about that. What was your design vision, and what was the main thing you were trying to accomplish? There had to be some real thought into putting all of this under one roof and making it work.
Let's go back to whiskey. That's where it all started.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. But you were right. You were right. Well, actually, when Jane approached us with that program, it was true. We're talking about a very refined space, and then a space that holds sweaty people. Those are not spaces you normally jam together. So how do we actually do that in a manner that is appropriate for both? We actually did think about that too, because, um, you know, should we have separate entries? Should we have separate lobbies, keep them completely apart? Or should we come up with a way to actually utilize it? Because even in terms of square footage, we couldn't really necessarily afford to have two big old lobbies for these things. In the end, the gymnasium, which really became a combination of a gym and also really an event space, really, they were allowed to share the main entry, which is primarily used for performance, but it's also used for anything related to the event side of things. And so to separate the sweaty, if you will, there is a separate entry at the far end of the project that actually faces more toward the campus and even the student housing, which allows then students to access daily separately then from the performance side of things, if that makes any sense. And so that way we could control that. And most of the refined entry, if you will, comes through the front door. And then thinking about it in terms of how those spaces work together or work separately, we actually did almost create that lobby itself, if you will, is really just sort of literally like a void or a glass box that divides these two big spaces separately. And that is what severs them to keep them apart, but it's also what they share. So it becomes this formal front entry. So in many ways, I think it turned into a positive to be able to work that way. I don't know, Shawn, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, David, you're not wrong. You know how many times during design the conversation between like 3-piece suits and yoga pants, right, came up? It's like these two are trying to merge and become one.
Yeah.
And we got to be really sensitive and careful about timing and scheduling of events and how do you do that. And I think the other piece of that, David, I know we could spend a lot of time talking about how we kept them together, but then also separated them. But there's something to be said about the efficiencies we gained in being able to use a shared lobby, a shared bank of restrooms. I mean, both of those programs take a lot of plumbing fixtures, right? To be able to support that many people in either one at any given time. If you were to build those separately, you got double the amount of plumbing fixtures, right? Because they each have to have their own. So there was a lot of really good overlap that actually did make sense and became economical, right? Because there is, on surface, they look very, very separate and different, and they are, but they did have some overlap, and we capitalized on that. We were able to kind of put it together in the right spots and make the one building work really well together. And I gotta say, we can get into the weeds later on of acoustics, and I know we will. I know we have to, right?
Right.
But there was a really fun example of this when we finally tested it for the acoustics, and our acoustic consultants flew out and they were in there testing the space with some of the orchestra. They had a rehearsal that night, so our acoustic consultants are sitting in there with all the testing equipment, listening, and lo and behold, we scheduled it on this night. Didn't realize there was also a teen dance that was scheduled to go on in the gym, and they come walking out and didn't even realize this thing was going on. If we had effectively been able to acoustically separate these things so that you could literally have a teen, and we proved it out right there, right on test day, right? Like the teen dance was doing their thing on the other side of the lobby, and a flute solo was going on in the performance hall, and neither were any the wiser of each going on, right? And that made me smile, right? Because that was the target, that was the goal, and that was hard to achieve, but there it was, proof that we did it, right?
Well, neither one of those things in either half of that building are quiet activities.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not like one you expect to be a quieter thing. I mean, there might be moments, some yoga pants moments, but, generally a gym, especially if it's an event center, is going to be pretty noisy. And in any kind of performance, they're going to have speakers and music. And that is something else. I had to ask, but I'm also thinking about, we all know how much it's costing to build any kind of building anymore. This is going to age me so badly. I remember when schools were like $50 a square foot. That is
Yeah.
scary. That is scary. And now you
Yeah.
can just stop. And now it's it's a lot
Yeah.
more expensive to do things, and to be able to do what anybody else is going to do in two separate facilities, pretty much anywhere else, and get that into one building. Also, the economy of making it happen. There might be some things that cost a little bit more to, the acoustics or whatever, to make sure you could have that separation. But the economy of building one building and not two, and it's a gorgeous building, by the way. I haven't even mentioned that yet. I did not look at that.
Thank you.
I expected it Montana, putting these things in one place. I expected it to look a lot less, because I didn't get the pictures till last night, a lot less pretty and a lot more functional. And it's gorgeous. I'm just like, wow. It's really amazing. And you probably saved a fortune by doing it in all in one building instead of two.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. And that's a really great point. And I also think that even over the course of construction itself, we couldn't even build half of that building today, what they spent on it when we actually bid the thing. That's how fast things have been gone up here in the state of Montana. So it's a great point. If she would have said, let's do the athletics now, we'll do the performance hall later, we would never have built it. We just wouldn't have built it, or we would have had to wait a lot longer or raise 3 times as much. So it's an excellent point. Efficiency by combining them into one building, I think, was the key. And the exterior of the building too, it's a good point. I mean, we did put a lot of effort into the shell of that building. We looked at it utilitarian-ish at first, and in fact, Shawn can talk a lot about the materiality of how and why we picked what we picked. We'll get there, but we wanted to sort of craft it too, so it wasn't just a utilitarian building. We had the opportunity to create, essentially a work of art. It is about art. The building's about performing arts, and so we started thinking about how do we craft the building to represent that. And I don't know if you picked up on it, but even the movement of the shell of the building itself, we actually used the angles and things that you see in the shell of the building. It actually was a derivative of like the movement of a conductor's baton. We were like, you move your baton up, move it up again. So the shapes were actually evocative really of that movement. In fact, the original design, Shawn might remember this as well, they were actually swooped curves, each of those shapes that are now angles. So the budget drove it to a straight line, which happens all the time. But we kind of expected that might happen. But we started with curves with the initial rendering and then moved it to angles. And then the angles started to also be evocative a bit of the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains behind them. So these tilts and turns of the shell were intentional to move those ideas forward, and at least into the design of the shell. The other thing that we looked at with the exterior too was the materiality, and we'll get to this as well. But it was really fun to think about concrete versus sort of the flat lock panels that we use and the effects of light on these things. So we can get into all those things, but I want to ask you, Cherise, did you notice on the exterior of this building, there are very subtle things that represented music, and not necessarily in quite a literal way, but like if you look at the window framing and the entry, there's this window wall. It is very horizontal mullions, and then every X number of feet was a very definitive vertical one. And if you look at it and just think about that area, it was actually designed to look like essentially the frets of a guitar or any stringed instrument like that. And there's window patterns in there that are groups of 2 and groups of 3 that are meant to represent the black keys on the piano and how they're patterned. So we tried to use these very subtle things in ways to move the effects of music around the shell of the building. Not necessarily overtly, but more subtly. So those are the fun things you can do when you've got that mass of a building. So I'll stop there.
David's starting to talk about the poetry woven within. But Cherise, I mean, there's really something to be said about what David's alluding to here too, because it's easy to see how economical and efficient it was with program, right? These 2 programs sharing some program, becoming efficient in that way. I have to applaud our design team in our restraint. I think we did a very good job, and I think Cushing Terrell pushes for this, is to find the moments where one thing can always do 2 things, right? And if we can make that happen, we're incredibly successful. And now all of a sudden the building is working more efficiently, right? And for instance, I mean, David's talking about poetry within the windows. Well, we needed windows anyway. So if it can be more meaningful, that's great, right? I look at it's hidden all within this building. When we we look at even the juxtaposition between these spaces, the performance hall and the gym, we wanted the shared lobby, but if you look at the lobby, we sunk one into the earth and we kept one high, and that was part of a reaction to the landscape and to the hill, right? And so it was an effort to keep excavation minimal, but the volume of that performance hall was massive, right? And it just had to be that height and that width and that length. And so how do you work with that next to a gym that's also big but not nearly as large, right? And something that happened very uniquely to this building, I think when you enter into a performance hall, most of the time you walk in at the main level and you go up to a balcony, right? Well, here we flip that on its head. You walk in and you're at the balcony, and then you process down a grand staircase to the main lobby, the main entrance to the theater, down low, right? And so this is all driven by the hill and an effort for economy. It allowed for some very interesting things, which there's a massive hole in that upper lobby, and there's just bridges that span across to get you into the balcony level. Well, it's not just a hole, an atrium for the sake of an atrium. It actually works to separate the two spaces acoustically. The less structure we have connecting the two, the more we limit the sound transferring across that structure and infiltrating the other space, right? And so the normal person walking in is just going to say, this is a beautiful lobby. Oh, it's an awesome curve. And that hole down below, connects you to the lower lobby, and it's a fun visual experience, but it's doing so much more. And we found efficiency and economy in that. And I think that was as a design team, we kind of beat that home, and we tried for it in every little nook and cranny that if we're doing one thing, it almost has to do two always. We're not efficient enough, right? So there's little gems like that all throughout, and we could enter the whole podcast. We'd gobble up all your time.
Well, even right now,
I'm
Shawn,
looking at it.
I was just going to say, even now,
Go
Shawn,
ahead.
you're probably doing two things at once. You're probably reviewing shop drawings while on this podcast, aren't you? That's right. We're always doing two things at once. Even our architecture does. Just go ahead.
Well, so I have it open now. I see the piano keys. Totally spotted those the second I got to one of those pictures. The other thing you told me about, I didn't spot as quickly.
Oh, at the entry itself, there's a big window wall, and it has very horizontal mullions, and then a series of verticals. And it was just sort of driven by either the staff lines or maybe guitar fret, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So they're subtle, and it allows some influence or some interpretation, but it was just sort of almost the folly side of it, the fun side. To Shawn's point, we needed windows anyway. Let's create something that people have to interpret.
I didn't have that particular, because there's different angles from the outside.
Sure.
I wouldn't have pulled that out on my own, but now that you've said it, I completely see it.
Well, yeah,
the piano
you're not
keys
the only
I spotted.
one. Yeah, I hear that all the time. It's like, once you explain it, once you tell me that, now my wife does the same thing. She's always looking for that throughout the building as we go to concerts and things. She's, where's that? Was this intentional?
I think that's okay. And part of it is to not give it all away on the first day. People should explore this thing, and over time, maybe they'll see something new in a year or two, if they can. So it is driven. It's supposed to be an exploratory thing. So yeah.
Well, it is truly. I would not, if you would have just sent me pictures and not told me what this was, I definitely wouldn't have thought. It was the two spaces. I certainly wouldn't have thought it was in fairly remote Montana.
We don't that's not an insult.
Or privately funded. No, I just, smaller communities, less populated areas don't typically have the same kind of access to dollars, especially in any kind of public facility.
Right.
Do as much with it. This does not look like a project that cut any corners.
No.
You guys did a fantastic job of really pulling that beauty out of all the functionality and letting that community have both. I wish everybody spent more time on that in buildings, especially public buildings.
Yeah.
So that's just my.
I appreciate the commentary, and it's an interesting point, because even if we had just it really doesn't cost that much more to add, a bit of, sort of mystique or imagery to that shell of that building. It's not like it costs us thousands of dollars more to do an angle or to put 3 windows and 2 windows together, or to, none of that is more money. We had to do these things anyway. So to Shawn's point, it was really just, we spent the time to try to give it an artful impression, as opposed to just building. So I really appreciate the compliment.
Well, my job is to specify products.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes, and I'm not an architect, but I do sometimes think in architecture, they get kind of so lost in a vision, or on a path that forget to kind of think outside that proverbial box. And that there are a lot of really common, more affordable products you can use in unique ways or in different angles or whatever, and get a completely different look. You don't necessarily have to go get the thing that's titanium plated to get something that's striking and beautiful. It's just maybe thinking about using something in a different way. And it's a good reminder, I think, for our listeners to don't be so married to an idea that you got to do this because there might be a way to get to where you want to go and still stay within whatever, every project has a budget.
Well, I really appreciate your comments here, and you recognized it as a beautiful building. You said that right away, right? And then to me, I kind of go, well, what about it made it beautiful to you, right? Well, I think inherently, whether we recognize it or not, you didn't notice the piano key windows or the inherent poetry embodied in the thing, right? But I think it really draws out human nature, attaches itself to that. Whether we recognize it or not, these are the symbolic pieces of architecture that really do matter, and they come through as beauty, whether we understand the full symbolism inherent in it or not, right? That's why the Gothic cathedrals are so welcomed and received, even if you're not religious or Christian or whatever, right? Like they're meaningful to so many because it's in there, whether we know what it's doing truly or not. And that's, to David's point too, it's a part of this exploratory process of experiencing the building and what you're there to do. But you find a little bit every time you go, right? Something new. And so something drew you to it, right? And you picked up on it, even if you didn't catch all of the little idiosyncrasies of it, right? And I think that's where joy in architecture really comes from. That's why I think David and I are so passionate about this one, and it was so much fun because of some of those things that we were allowed to do and emphasize and truly push forward, right?
It's funny that you say that because I do a very technical job, but how I respond to buildings has zero technical anything in it. I'm a marshmallow. Everything's about how does this make me feel.
Yeah.
I don't particularly, when I'm experiencing a space, care about the technicalities. How do I feel when I walk into the space? What is my first impression? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is this a place I want to hang out? Did something pop out at me and I went, oh, that's gorgeous. That's my whole technical side goes right out the window when I look at a building, and it's all heart and no brains. But then I love it even more when I find out and see those, because I'll never unsee those piano keys and that fret now. I just won't. That just makes it even better for me. But yeah, it's completely emotional to me. And I do think a space, and I've said this before in the podcast, a space affects how you feel in the moment.
Yeah.
And anybody that tries to say, oh, it's just 4 walls and it doesn't really matter is full of crap. Excuse my English. It affects your mood and all of that. So you guys have just done a fantastic job of making that, have that feeling of, ooh, I want to be here and I want to.
I love this conversation with you on technicality and perspective and poetry and emotion. Can I dive deeper into one more detail? I have to.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Sorry, David. I spent so much time.
I'm just gonna sign off. You guys go ahead.
Yeah. See you later. No.
I'm just kidding. Okay, just kidding. All right.
You talk about the technical aspect, right? And one of the truly technical pieces is a so functional. I guess I'm at a loss of words here, but the railing. I'm going to go to the railing in the guardrail in the atrium of the lobby that everybody comes and experiences, and it's the one element that's on a curve. Everything else in the building is very linear, rectilinear, square lines, rhythms, and it's this divergence, right? Well, a normal railing has a 4-foot baluster and infill between those balusters, and we could have just plopped any old thing, any old beautiful thing, and it would have been okay, right? But we were diligent about detailing that such that it had this consistent run, these vertical fins that were continuous, unbroken by any pattern. It's just continuous all the way across that curve. And as you walk by that thing, it opens up in a way that you get to see through it in moments, and it closes off in others. And it's this really fun, becomes dynamic in a space that is otherwise stagnant, right? And it's just wood and steel, right? It was literally a steel fin that we replicated 200 times down that curve, and we slapped some wood on it to warm it up. But in that orientation of the curve, it actually does something totally different. And as you walk by it, it opens up visually, and then it closes off. And my favorite moment, though, is when you get downstairs. You walk past this railing, you get downstairs, and now you're looking up through that hole in the atrium, and you see that curve railing again. And as somebody else walks by, it plays with light and shadow as their body moves across that thing, and it literally looks like somebody is plucking the strings of a harp. And you don't notice it, right? Like you're down there and you see it, but because it's a curve and we were diligent about it being uninterrupted pattern, and it's like, you know what? The detail matters, right? It just really, really matters. And you never experience that. And maybe now that I've opened it up, everybody's going to see it now, right? But I looked for it, my first time in a concert there, and it was so important. And it's taking that technical, we need a guardrail. It has to be there for safety. Well, we're going to do it out of steel and wood, which are two of the most simple materials that have been around forever. And just the way we did it made it musical, made it dynamic, made it really, really fun, right? And these are the things that sing to me. And I took how much time there to kind of describe that detail, but
that's good.
We have to get back to into the details, but I do have to tell you, as you were talking about, I'm looking at the picture of that right now while you were talking about it, and I was sitting here going, they're probably going to think I'm crazy, but I feel a harp. And when you said the harp, I'm like, score! I saw it before you told me.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
No, that it's you look at it from other angles, I don't see the harp. When you look at it dead on, I don't see that. But when you look at it from that curve, that was the first thing I thought. So you succeeded. It's
a great point because I mean, again, we needed a railing. You got to do something there. You could have done anything with the shape or the or form or even material of the railing. But the curve was the only curve in the whole place, and it was derived from really the shape of a harp or a cello or something, the form of a wooden instrument. And then it also guides you right to the back, and focuses you right to the back window toward the pond out there, and brings you down the stairs. So you can do whatever you want to, but we chose a more artful approach to it. So it's a good point. I'm glad you saw the harp. It's a success.
I'm really proud of myself right now.
Yeah, good job.
Well, and it's fun to think of each one as its own. Okay, the performance hall is the music, obviously, right? And the gym is the motion, obviously, right? And those two are their own, but when you put them together, how often are you doing an exercise or in a gym and you don't have music playing? Like a lot of times there is some rhythm or music or one of the first examples I gave was there was a teen dance or a school dance going on in there, right? Or any sort of event that they're going to have oftentimes has some music associated with it. Well, a lot of times when you're listening to music in the performance hall, is there a ballet? Is there a dance component? Is there, like, I got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and neither one can listen to music and not move, right? Like they're just active. They got to dance, right? And it's kind of, we've been talking about these two separate spaces and separate programs, but they're so much more married than we give them credit for, right? Because, and that's where music and motion really, they come together. They have to. They're always coexisting, right? It's part of it.
Well, I think that's another thing that really appealed to me about talking about this building, because like your 2 and 4-year-old, I can't listen to music and not literally anywhere and not move. I'm a music freak. And so I love that whole theme and that whole kind of underlying drive to make this building be what it is. Yeah. So before we get into really specific details, how about just a quick broad overview? We've talked about the 2 big spaces, but just a quick kind of rundown, not in detail, because we're gonna get into that in a minute. But what spaces exist in this building? Besides, we know there's a gym and we know there's an auditorium, but what other spaces? What are the spaces you had to design for this building to have have everything you need?
Go ahead, Shawn.
Want me to jump in here, Dave? Yeah, this was. So if you think about it again, the lobby splitting the 2, right? So the gym component is its event space, but it's gym and intramural function for college students on campus. So it's got the associated locker rooms, a small fitness center with some gym equipment. It's got call it a yoga studio, but it doubles as a kind of a flexible space that can do a lot of different functions because it's just one large multi-purpose room, right? So. And that's kind of that side of the building. But then when we go over to the music side, the performance hall side, there's obviously the large 1,000 plus seat performance hall. And then down in that lower level is all of the necessary dressing rooms, loading docks, green room, those sort of things that support that space and that you need to function on a performance night, right? And then upstairs is the music department for the school. So they've got a couple classrooms, like a keyboard classroom, a standard classroom, practice rooms. So soundproof. I think we had, what did we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so individual practice rooms for the music students to study in, practice in. And what else is there? I guess that's. Oh, the small recital space. So there is actually a smaller performance hall, a recital hall in that upper level as well. That kind of doubles as another music classroom, but is actually like a little sister to the main performance hall. It has a lot of the same acoustic properties, and it's just a smaller venue space. That works great. It's a ton of fun in there because we were able to put some daylight into that one, be in the smaller venue. Piano soloist or something can happen in there on another given night. We don't have concessions. We should highlight just a few more spaces. We can't forget there's a pretty wonderful art gallery down in that main lobby, and they are pulling some really cool shows. They're getting on a circuit for a bunch of different art shows and exhibits. That's a wonderful space too. And then just the opposite of that, when you walk out the back lobby, we tend to hone in. David and I are architects, so we hone in so hard on the building itself. But there is just a beautiful landscaped amphitheater on the back side of this thing that overlooks the pond, the natural pond that's there. And it is one of my favorite spots and moments of this entire building, is sitting outside on that amphitheater and listening to one of the guitarists come out on that little stage we've got down there, and all of a sudden we've got an outdoor venue as part of this thing. It is truly wonderful, that piece of it. I can't forget about that.
And it wasn't even part of the plan.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't even part of the plan. That was a serendipitous addition, and it happened as a result, by the way, of the fact that we pushed this building onto the hillside. It wasn't, I don't know if you even know this, Shawn, originally we were going to build this building. It was my idea to put it on where the parking lot is, because I thought it was a better design to align with the pedestrianism of the rest of the campus. But of course, cost ruled, and we can't, we'd have to build a whole parking lot if we did that. So we pushed it to the edge, kept the parking lot where it is, pushed it onto the hillside, and then the hill became something we had to deal with. And the fact that we originally intended for the gym to be on the, I guess it was going to be on the lower level, the same level as the performance theater. You're going to have to excavate all kinds of material, so they both walked out. Well, economy drove that choice to bring the gym up to the level of the main floor entry. Therefore, we didn't have to excavate, but now we had a hill to deal with. So we said, let's build an amphitheater. It was an afterthought that turned into a really amazing amenity. The backdrop of this whole amphitheater, it faces sort of pretty much northeast
Northeast a little bit.
And I think the pond is the backdrop. So it turned out to be a really, really great spot. And again, that's one of the discovery of some of these things. You don't mean for them to even happen. But when they do, you're just like, gosh, I meant to do that, right? I totally meant to do that. But
and it's the hill. The hill could have been such an obstacle, right? And then it became suddenly our best friend, right? Yeah. And it did something totally above and beyond. And I know they've had a few events there in the summer, and gosh, the sun sets to the west to your back as you're watching a show to the northeast, and they pulled food trucks around to grab a bite to eat. Here it's this pretty high-end space, I'll say, right? I mean, these events are really nice, and you're talking, suit type occasions, right? Well, they make it kid friendly, and we go out onto the amphitheater and we sit in the grass, and it's a total another experience within this building. We're just overlapping layers and layers and layers of functionality. It's wonderful, things that they can do inside the space, outside the space. It's tucked around behind the building, so it's not influenced by the parking lot. So you feel it's like the backyard, right? It's like going to a backyard barbecue. You're tucked away, you're enjoying yourself. You don't have to worry about the commotion and the traffic. It's nice. It's wonderful. Beautiful.
Well, I would imagine even when there's not events going on there, if I was going to school there, that'd be a place I'd go sit and study.
Absolutely. Bring your laptop and hunker down, right?
Yep. I did not realize. I just thought it was a landscaping feature. I didn't realize that's what that was. But perfect way to use the hill instead of just having this big thing there. Perfect way to use the hill. Right. Which kind of brings me to the next question. So typically I like to kind of work my way from the outside in. So my first question is about the site and the placement of the building, which we just talked about. So were there any other notable things with the site that you had to deal with? So we know you didn't go with your original location. You decided to go into the hill, which was a great choice, by the way. What was involved in getting that site ready to start building the building on it?
There wasn't a lot. I mean, it was a pretty raw. We had to do a lot of. There wasn't a lot of clearing to be done. It was actually a perfect spot, and obviously, if I'd had my way, it would have been a bad idea when I think of it. So not all my ideas are good ideas, but at the same time, in the end, sort of pushing it to the edge and over the hill, so to speak, I think it turned out to be the right location for all kinds of reasons. But I can't think of anything we had to do specifically to the hill or anything to prepare other than move a lot of dirt around.
No, but I think even identifying that hill was driven somewhat by a traffic plan, right? And so to get on campus, there's only one road. Grandview gets you there, and so traffic study said, okay, it can handle this, but we got to create a back way out. When events are done, and so plus when you look at a facility like this is going to start seating 1,000+ people, audience members, how do you find parking for all of that, right? And again, one other opportunity to save costs was, okay, well, the campus already has X amount of parking spots and a paved area. Well, is there something that says we can capitalize on one of those parking areas that's already there, right? And not have to build a whole bunch more asphalt to support this thing. Because if you think about it, a lot of these events are happening in the evening. Whereas, the other functions of campus are happening during the day, right? So what's parking for students during the day now becomes parking for the events in the evening. And it's an awesome overlap. And again, some synergy, a shared resource that was already there. Let's use that to our advantage. And so we didn't have to build a parking lot to support this space.
Much to my chagrin.
Yeah. David wanted the asphalt.
No.
No, but that's why it got I think, located there. We had this parking lot that had a building on all three sides, and it had this empty spot to the north.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's use that. Let's work with that, right? And sure, it came with its obstacles of the hill and the pond, and we only got this much room. And if we're going to squeeze it in, what does it have to be, right? But I think it stemmed from there. That helped drive the decision.
For sure.
Oh, that makes sense. And one more way to leave something out to make something work.
Yeah.
We don't always have to add things to make something work.
Right.
Okay, so let's get technical about this building a little bit. I've worked in multiple disciplines, mainly in architecture, but I've also worked in MEP engineering, and now I'm working in building science. So I'm particularly interested in the enclosure of a building. I like to hear about that. What materials did you use? What's inside those layers of the wall?
So the assembly of the walls, I mean, I think you can clearly see the concrete, right? The two big spaces, the performance hall and the gym, we laid it on precast concrete. And that became the right answer for a number of reasons, economy actually being one of them too. And typically a precast comes with a high dollar amount, kind of a premium product, right? But when you get to this volume and this size, this performance hall itself had to be so tall, so wide, so long, and unencumbered. No columns. We gotta make this thing work, and it needed mass for acoustics because those low frequency sounds want to escape, and so we needed the mass to keep them in. And so concrete. Well, at that size, we actually in Kalispell, we're in a seismic zone, seismic category D, which is pretty impressive. And to work around that and get the structural capacity out of that at that height and that scale, precast became the obvious answer. Anything else was going to just balloon on us really quick and hard to achieve those strengths and those spans and get the mass out of it that we needed. So not only is it precast, but it's got the layer of insulation in between two layers of concrete. So it's a sandwich panel. So it carries the mass and the thermal properties. And lo and behold, there's 114 panels, I think, total between the two boxes, and some are 55 feet tall and the others are 35 feet tall. And the contractor was able to set those things 10 a day. And we had those boxes erected almost within 2 weeks. And with 2.5 years of construction, of these things under construction, those concrete boxes were the first things in place, and they kept their temperature pretty even keel throughout the whole length of construction. I'd show up on site in the heat of the summer, and it was comfortably cool in that concrete box. And it wasn't conditioned. They didn't have walls or air handlers in there yet of the other spaces, right? It was literally just the concrete boxes. They were tempered. They were holding their own because of that thermal mass that's inherent in those concrete panels, right? And so they were obviously the primary structure, the primary spaces, and the materiality that was correct for a lot of reasons. And it helps with the high swings that you're talking about. The warm summers, the cold winters, those stay pretty tempered. Now that the supporting spaces were steel. We went steel construction, and then we gave it a skin. And we talked with we used our resources, our local resources. We got really good relationships with our generals here locally, and we used them as a sounding board, right? We said, what's efficient, cost effective? We can do it this way, we can do it this way. And ultimately, with their help and guidance, we landed on doing that steel skeleton and cladding it with what you would call it's like a bonded rigid insulation with a plywood bonded face, right? And that gave us a really clean, solid surface. It gave us a really good thermal layer, and then a nice nailing layer for any amount of siding, whatever we wanted to skin the thing with. But everything was handled thermally behind that layer, and structurally worked really, really well. So does that help? Is that a good technical answer?
That's perfect. Well, I love concrete, so I love talking about concrete buildings anyway. I'm just one of those. I love the look of concrete done right on a building.
Now especially
David,
sandwich.
Tell me about the aesthetics.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, you kind of. I was just saying, no. He had me at sandwich panel because I haven't had lunch yet. So What do you could put ham between those panels of concrete? Maybe some ham or some cheese. Okay, that's not even funny. No, aesthetically,
pickle. I know.
Yeah. Anyway, we wrestle about what's the right material for these things. We realized that concrete was the best material. So then we actually we spent a lot of time thinking about how we can not make them. Should we dress them up? Should we cover them with something? Should we let it be? In the end, it was like, let's just be honest about the fact that these are just big, huge friggin' concrete panels. And, sometimes honesty is just, my mom said honesty is the best policy. I think it's true even in architecture in many cases. Let's let these panels be what they are. We were so honest about these panels. We even let them just be the raw materials at the sides as you enter into this elegant lobby. You've got these really rough, raw concrete panels just expressed in the interior of the lobby. And we sort of contrast that with soft, warm, wood in the balcony. We inserted some wood into little slits we put in the precast very carefully, randomly to represent. Actually, if you look at that elevation of the interior on the performance hall side, there's little wood slats in there, and those are just inserted into the slots that we put in there to represent what looks like, well, you can imagine what you want, but it's supposed to represent clear piano music or maybe the slider on a mixer board, that kind of thing. And it also just animates, it adds warmth to the concrete, but just let the concrete be what it is. When you pull that concrete out of their forms, you never know quite what you're going to get. And so you do see some variety in these panels, and let's just let it be. We thought of, should we paint it? Should we sandblast it? Nah, let's just leave it. And there's differences in these panels, but we're like, let's just own that and love it. So in the end, we've actually gotten a lot of compliments, surprisingly. You would think that in a place like this where people expect pure elegance, that they would say, gosh, what are these rough panels? But in the end, I think people appreciate just the fact that they are what they are. So I guess in the end, we all embrace the panel. We embrace the panel. That's the theme of this speech.
Yeah. Yeah,
but
the concrete was definitely the champion of the day, and I think, to David's point, the honesty in the product, and I think I'm going to give you a little credit, David, because I think those little reveals we embedded in that precast, I think it was you that really pushed to work within what they could do, right, at the concrete plant, and you'll notice we stuck all vertical. We kept we wanted to add a little texture to the thing, right? But not overdo it. But we were diligent about keeping it vertical. And I think, David, that was a lot of you. I'll give you credit for that. But because these panels get set and if they're a 1/4 inch off or a 1/2 inch off and you've got a horizontal line trying to track across that thing, you're going to see that skip and that jump across that panel. And so knowing that in advance and building a texture or talking through a texture that won't invite that opportunity to happen, right? Like let's not even allow for that potential misstep, right? Let's keep this thing within the realm of what we know it's going to do, embrace it and run with it, right? And so I think it was some very smart moves in regards to the concrete as well that helped it. Yeah. Yes, it was raw, right? But we helped it gain a little elegance along the way too, right? I think there was some very intentional moves to be done.
Shawn, remind me, what was the... I'm sorry, Cherise, there's probably a little delay. I apologize for that. I keep on stepping over you. All I was going to say was, Shawn, do you remember what was the highest panel? Those panels are what, 60? They're 55 feet tall. Yep. That's a pretty good sized panel. Those had to be, and Shawn knows this better than anybody, there weren't a lot of people in remote northwest Montana that can even make those. This isn't an urban. This is so we had the closest place though was Missoula. So we were lucky. We had a place that was able to do. We went down there, toured the site, walked around. They showed us how best to do this, and how best to do it in a way that we could actually apply some of those techniques and some of the textures that Shawn's talking about. We didn't want to just use like a standard print. We just said, let's just do a raw panel, but we're going to add some vertical thoughts in there. So they showed us how they could do that with various techniques. We hadn't done that. We weren't sure what we were going to get. So honestly, that was I think the biggest cost too for these is probably the shipping, right? We had to ship a couple hundred panels up from Missoula. It isn't so much the material, it's the shipping. Yeah. Well,
and that was quite the hurdle to overcome too. Again, like I say, during design, we were talking to our generals to give us insights and constructability, but here we were pretty heavily in conversations with the precast plant as well. And then again, Department of Transportation, because we knew if they're going to come from Missoula, which is 2 hours away, well, what's the rating on the road? What can the road take as far as a weight and capacity? And what's the width and the length that we can even ship, right? Well, we got to get them here somehow. And so the max width to ship is 12 feet. Well, our panels are 8 feet because they had to be this thick to get the strength out of them. So that thickness and that weight ratio, we had to shrink down to 8 foot of width to ship within the weight category that we could on a truck, right? So they came 2 panels at a time, 8 foot wide, 55 long. And we worked with the Department of Transportation real early on, and we had the foresight to ask the question during design. So we didn't get to a point where, gosh, we really wanted those 12-foot panels and now we can't do it, right? So there was a ton of checks and back checks and run the lap again. And even to the point where working with the precast plant at 55 feet long, everybody thinks of concrete as so strong and so rigid, right? But they take 28 days to cure fully. Well, at that length and that scale, if they were to lay flat in the concrete yard, we would end up with a banana board like you'd get your 2x4 from Home Depot. It's going to be cupped and warped and all kinds of wonky, and we can't have that out of the concrete. So our structural engineers worked with the precast plant to not only design the panels, but we designed a custom steel crib for them to have in their plant on site. So when they cast these panels, they can pluck them and sit them on edge and let them cure on their edge and not cup and warp. So they came to us as true and plumb and square as they possibly could, right? It's the level of thought and care that went into just the concrete was monumental. And it truly, I mean, it championed the day, right? And those everything is centered around those as the primary material, right? So it needed that level of care, had to have that level of care.
So let's move inside. We've talked a lot about the types of spaces inside. Talk to me a little bit about your interiors, some of your finishes, your choices. We've had some of that scattered throughout, but just kind of give me maybe a couple of your favorite things in the interiors that you would like to share that stand out for you or you're proud of or something you did differently, whatever you think is best for us to hear about.
We should have had Jessica on this call, David. She was our interior designer here within Cushing, Terrell, and she did just such a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Just all the accolades go to her, no doubt. But she worked pretty intimately with our acoustic consultants. And I think, I mean, as beautiful as the lobby is and all the other supporting spaces, I think that performance hall needs to take a lot of the credit here. I think the moves in there, every single surface in that space is incredibly intentional and purposeful. The space was designed around the idea of unamplified sound, which means that you don't necessarily need a microphone and speakers to project the sound from the stage to the very tip-top seat in the balcony. The building itself, that space itself, is working as an instrument, shaped and textured and masked to push the sound from a single soloist on stage without a microphone all the way back to where it needs to go, to every seat in the house. And that being said, I mean, I can't unravel all of those surfaces, but we've got some smooth surfaces, some textured that are like wood slats that are different sizes and shapes, and they're meant to diffuse the sound. When they get hit, some of the surfaces are meant to absorb the sound. The shaping was incredibly intelligent, intentional. Those cheek walls, as they're called, they kind of flank the stage right and left. They're the curved wood pieces that you see on either side of that proscenium stage. Were the most important piece of that. And they've got 5 or 6 layers of sheetrock on those things because they have to push, again, those low frequency sounds without that mass would go right through that wall. Well, we needed them to bounce off of that and go to the audience members. And the right shaping, we studied it in model after model, and the right shaping and the right smooth texture really worked to make sure. And it's fun because I got to walk around after the thing was built and do all the testing with the acoustic consultants when they're there. And I've learned so much from this project. The acoustics and everything, you learn a little bit about it in school and projects, but this was on a whole nother level. And I took the time to ask the whys and really understand it. And our consultants at Threshold Acoustics were great about taking the time to teach me. It's fun. Sound travels a lot. Sound waves and light waves travel very similarly. And so when we were testing the thing, we shined a light from the center of the stage off one of those cheek walls, and it hit a hot spot. And you can walk around every single seat in the house and you see a hot spot, and that's the sound wave. That's the light wave bouncing directly to you as a listener. And no matter where you sit, you are seeing a hot spot off of that. It's a visual representation of the sound that's happening when a performance is going on. And it was just proof positive. And it's really fun to go through those exercises and see how effective we truly were, right? And I talked to the acoustic consultants. I said, how did we get this so good? and they said, well, we stuck to the basics. Like, that performance hall really dove back into the fundamentals of acoustics that have been tried and true for years in performance halls. We had curves instead of straight lines. And we did all of the right dimensional things, right? And we trusted them. We leaned on them. They went back to the basics, and and it won the day, right? I think it was a good exercise, a good testament, and I think the finishes really, really mattered in that space.
And Shawn, you remember on opening night, remember the Waylon Jennings? And if you've ever seen the Waylon Jennings, they're just a great. So they're the openers. Yeah, I think it was sort of a soft opening, but in general, the place was filled.
Yeah.
But remember their last number, they all stood up at the front of the stage. Microphones were gone, instruments were off, and their last tune was a little a cappella tune that they did. And I was like, oh my God, I hope this works. But and they sung it a cappella, and it was just glorious. I mean, there was no need for microphones. It was a perfect testament to everything you just said. I mean, it worked beautifully. It was just elegant, beautiful, and of course their voices are so wonderful. What a great opening act! But it was just great to see that everything that you're talking about actually worked without microphones in 1,000-seat theater. So really a testament. And you're right. Threshold is really. I mean, they own that recognition. It was an excellent acoustic design. So we really have a lot. We have a lot of respect for those guys. Good job.
What is the ceiling in the auditorium? I'm trying to tell from this picture. What is the ceiling?
Are you talking those kind of hanging clouds? Those suspended, curved white elements?
Yeah. Are those fabric or are those something else?
No, they are. They're a Kinetics product, which they are a company. They make acoustic products, and so it's a hard panel, and it's got what's called a gel coating. So they're smooth. And because we wanted the sound to go up there and bounce back down to the audience. Some sound is meant to go past them and get absorbed up in the stratosphere of the catwalk that's all black that you don't even know what's going on up there, right? But so there's a duality to that ceiling. It's kind of this false ceiling that pushes some of the sound back down and lets some of it escape up and above.
Fact, so Shawn, remind me, what is the volume? The volume from those panels up to the actual ceiling is, I mean, it's extreme. How many feet? Do you remember how many feet? Because there's these oversized ducts that you could walk through up there to push sound very, very quietly. This is beyond my pay grade, but the mechanical engineering of those ducts is so oversized to push the air very slowly so it doesn't make noise. But also, you're right, the volume is intended to draw some of the acoustics up past those and be absorbed in the ceiling above. But it's got to be 25 feet or something.
Well, yeah, the panels themselves are 55, and so I want to say to the roof line. I mean, we're talking 40 feet tall or higher, right? 40, 45 probably to the underside of the roof deck in there. I mean, it's massive.
It's a lot longer further up to the ceiling than you think it is above those panels, I guess is what we're saying.
And they have a very full catwalk up there that, you don't see. And it's a very nice, a lot of catwalks and a lot of these performance spaces. They end up, that's where you skinny up, right? That's where it's, a lot of times you're forcing these theatrical personnel to kind of clamber through or duck through or crawl through. And we have a really robust catwalk system up there. And I know that the users have appreciated that. It's actually really functional, very functional to get around up there. But yeah, to David, your comment about those ducts that serve all the air in the space, it's unreal how big those were. It took them a long time to install those because not only are they that large, but they're double walled. And that's again for acoustics and whatnot. So it's like a centerpiece and an outer piece. And to try and get those to align and connect in 6-foot segments, and they're massive. We joked that these were our die-hard ductwork because Bruce Willis was going to come crawling through, right? They're that big. I've never had that big a ductwork on any project, but they don't feel that big in that space, right, David? I mean, you're in there and you look up and they're there. They're painted black. They kind of disappear, but they don't have any presence. They're that large and they're that effective because yet you're right. The air has to move through them very, very slow and basically then fall out to the audience. So we're not creating noise with the rush of air, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just find that ceiling very striking, and I couldn't tell exactly what material that was, and had no idea all of that was going on above it. So that's a great way to get a lot of services because you can't. All you see when you look at this auditorium is the pretty.
Yeah, right.
And that's not the case. I've worked on a number of auditoriums, different auditoriums or performance halls in my career. And invariably, there's some of the functionality that you just can't hide. That's kind of pretty in your face. And I always felt that took away from the space.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't see anything but pretty in this room. And I'm like, where's all this stuff? Except for those two things at the back of the hall hanging from the ceiling. Where's all this stuff? Cherise, I love that you said that because that was I gotta highlight those. So those ceilings that you're talking about, really acoustically, we needed 3 rows of those white ceilings, the closest ones to the stage, and the last 2 rows were not acoustically necessary. I'll say the ones that are above the balcony, and so we waffled. Again, Jessica, our interior designer, and I, we looked at it, 3D models, and we studied it, and we're like, do we get rid of these? We just didn't have the heart to strike them, even though they weren't acoustically necessary, because of exactly what you said right there. And I'm so glad we kept them because what it does is it completes the ceiling above even the people that are sitting in the balcony. So even if you buy one of those balcony seats and you're in there, you're up higher. Normally, without those, you would just see the inner workings of the catwalks. You would see all of that stuff, right, that you're talking about. And it would take away from the experience. So just keeping those 2 rows and that continuity of that ceiling coming up to that level helps those people in the balcony feel intimately part of that performance down low, right? It caps their vision and pulls them back down. So there isn't a bad seat in the house, right? I'm so glad we hung on to those and you picked up on it, right? We've hid the clutter. We've made it feel complete. Well, I've been to a lot of concerts, Broadway shows, whatever. I spent my sports arenas, and I'm kind of easily distracted. I don't like being. I want to focus on what I'm there to see, and you've got the catwalk and cameras moving or people running around up there, or whatever's going on. And I'm invariably looking at what's going on up there. What are they doing? Why is that there? Why wonder what that does? And it's just not as pretty on top of it. So taking away that distraction, I think, makes the performance itself, whatever it is, all the better. So I'm glad you kept those, and I'm glad I asked that question. Yeah. So we've touched on acoustics in different pieces and parts, like those. What did you call the little walls next to the stage?
cheek walls.
Cheek walls.
Yeah.
Cheek wall. I just remember it was a really cute name. Tell me about one or two major things acoustically you did in order to separate these two spaces. Have we covered all the acoustics in what we're talking about? I didn't think so. I thought there was more to that story.
We're not going to have enough time for that, Cherise.
Yeah. Well, give me a couple of the major points that really made it so that you could have a dance party going on in one space.
So that lobby, right? That lobby became really critical, and that hole in the lobby and the bridges over to the balcony, as I was kind of starting to talk about before. This is where the rubber met the road. The acoustic consultants did a really good job of explaining it to me. I'm going to take one of their lines and say, okay, we've got these two concrete boxes, and then we're going to put steel to create this floor and this roof and connect the two. And they compared it to the old telephone you'd make as a kid, from the top of your treehouse down to the ground, and it's a tin can and a tin can and a string across, and it actually works. There's science behind that and why that works. And the sound in one tin can excites the molecules of the string, and sound travels through that string and makes it to the other tin can. And so if you think about that analogy as our two concrete boxes and the steel is the string in between, if there's a rigid connection, it will translate through from one space to the other. Sound will penetrate. So our whole goal in that lobby was to cut the string, cut the steel, right? And so this is where it became a hole in the floor. Is great, right? That's a beautiful thing for us. And then we still needed access to the balcony. So let's do two slender bridges. And those bridges they're sitting on a resilient pad, a rubber pad. And so they're not actually rigidly connected to the performance hall. That connection where the bridge meets the concrete of the performance hall, that bridge is just floating there and ever so gently resting on that rubber pad, and is able to move and wiggle. And it's like how we would do a seismic joint. In all honesty, we called it an acoustic isolation joint, but it's just as though we were creating a seismic joint and allowing these two spaces to move independently. And so there is no rigid connection between boxes. And even up on the roof level, we truly did use a seismic joint, a bellow in the roof, a piece of foam that we stopped the structure there. We supported it in a different way. And there's a true break and a clean delineation between one side and the other. You can see it if you look careful, the carpet of the lobby. It does tie into the reception desk. Right in front of the reception desk is where this joint happens too, in the carpet of that lobby, and you do have to step across it when you walk down the hall towards the music department wing of the building. That's probably where it manifests itself most visibly. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't think of it. It just looks like a threshold at a door that you step over. But there was a 3-inch gap that we kept away from both sides of the building. It's all right in that line, right where the performance hall would otherwise touch the lobby. That's a clean sever, if you want to call it. And it worked, right? That was it was tricky. It was a very tricky detail. But yeah, with structural crew and the right embeds that we accommodated in the concrete, we were able to create the haunch and support the bridge and make it all happen.
One thing I didn't ask you, talking about your two boxes and the telephone, which is what I was thinking when you said that. I'm like, oh God, we're way on the same wavelength here with these guys today. So we've talked about noise getting from the gym to the auditorium, from the auditorium to the gym. We haven't talked about noise in the lobby. Curveball. What'd you do about noise in the lobby as a performance is going on in the auditorium or something is going on in the gym? Did you do anything to isolate that, or is there enough going on there to have had to take any extra steps?
No, good thought. And really, so most of these performance halls, and this is something I learned during this process too, is they factor in at every entry point, every door into the theater. They build what's called a sound and light lock. And So it's basically a vestibule. It's like you would entering into the front of the building. But there it's for thermal reasons. It's to, let one door close and then let the temperature of the building keep intact, right? And then you open the second set of doors. Well, it's similarly, we had a vestibule at every entry point into the theater, which worked as a sight and a light and sound lock, and enough distance between those doors that if you were to open that first set of doors and noise or light were to penetrate in, that door has to close before you open the second set of doors and then enter in. So hopefully there's not a lot of that happening mid-performance, right? And they have ushers and patrons are supposed to kind of respect that a little bit. But if that happens, right, there is that level of care right at each entry point to also facilitate that. Because you talked about sound, right? But light pollution is also one that we had to worry about, right? So it's yeah. That's how we handled that side of it.
Yeah.
You just said rubber meets the road, so now I can't say that in my question because you just used that term. So I feel like one of the best growth opportunities for any design professional truly happens during construction, because you can draw all kinds of great things, but then the rubber has to meet the road and you have to build it. And so I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody on any project ever that didn't have some kind of, I like the word opportunity better than problem or challenge. Challenge is fine. Something come up during construction that made you had to pivot, or you had to rethink something, or something you had to maybe tweak a little bit or work through as you're building it, because just things happen during construction and things change. What would you say your biggest lesson learned during construction of this project is that you would take to your next project and maybe do something differently at some point in design or at some point to not have that same challenge again?
Good. Yeah, good question. This is, this project in particular, I think I worked on it for 5 years between conceptual design through design to CA and all the way through construction. It was 5 years of my life. So, man, pick any number of them, right? Like that's that. I got
You're
a
supposed
list,
to say
but
it was a perfect project and everything went
yeah.
smoothly. That's
no, there's always learning. There's always learning, and I think I'm going to go back to the precast on this one. I might actually have two, but I'll start with the precast, and because it was so heavily a part of this project. And I talk about how well coordinated we were in advance and how it demanded that, right? And that was a puzzle through the whole thing. And during construction was no exception. And you find out each discipline, each industry works slightly differently. And things like, say, fire protection, low voltage wiring. A lot of times we specify things like you got to have X amount of water flow for a sprinkler system in this area, but we're not going to tell you how to route it, right? Well, it became really critical that we knew that route, because where is it going to cross? Where is it going to penetrate that precast? Because that precast was so full of steel and tendons and important structure buried within that. If we were to drill through that and hit one of those, the whole thing is compromised, right? The integrity of the panel is obliterated. And so normal construction projects, they just come in, they cut their hole through the wall and they go. We didn't have that luxury, right? And so this became a thing, and we had the mains mapped out for fire protection, and we said, you got to hit that. You have to hit that hole. That's where it's going to come through. And if I were to do it again, I think I would have tried to factor in just a couple more penetration opportunities in the precast, not knowing what's going to go there, right? Let's just say, let's put a 1 foot hole over here and another 1 foot hole over there, and give ourselves a little more flexibility and grace during construction. because inevitably there's this things, the cameras, the Wi-Fi, the WAPs up in the ceiling, right? The wireless access points, all of those things take small little low voltage cables. Well, I can't even sneak that through the precast effectively. I need a pathway for it. And you don't even know where that's going to be until you get into the construction and the drawings, and the actual installer is there and you're talking through it. lo and behold, voltage can only run 300 feet before it has to have another booster or something. So you can't run a whole lap around this structure and come back, right? It just, those were the nuances that we had to work through, to the point where we actually had to kind of go back in and reassess those concrete panels, map out where the steel was, and know that we got to drill a couple more holes, and we got to make sure we miss. So those are the scary moments, right? That you just you get nervous about, but it could have been easier, right? If we could have made it easier on ourselves. Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, but it will be next time.
Well, exactly, right? You can, now I know to work that grace in advance.
There you go.
And I guess the other thing was that this performance hall was easily one of the most complex buildings, highly technical buildings that this valley has seen to date, right? And our pool of contractors and subcontractors, they do a great job, but I don't think any of them had seen anything like this, right? And in myself included, during design, I knew this thing was getting more complex than I had ever seen before. So I had my own learnings to do, right? And I found, being on site so often and working through it during construction, that I realized how valuable it is to talk to everybody. We get so used to, as architects, talking to just the general, the superintendent on site, and he can disseminate the information to all the other parties necessary, right? Well, doing a couple laps around the building and you hear the painter talking about something, and they just don't understand why it is this way. And I took the time. I said, look, this is for acoustics. This is why we're doing this, right? And the light bulbs went off. Oh my gosh, is that why we have 5 layers of sheetrock on this wall? I couldn't for the life of me figure it out. And I said, yeah, it's for the low frequency sounds. This is what we're trying to achieve. And you know what? That little bit of time I took to kind of explain the bigger picture, they latched onto it. And they were so receptive to the things we had to do that seemed so painful, right? Like, we've got to build it this way. This is not fun, right? But it opened the door to more receptive ideas, right? To be able to understand why we are doing this, and the value of, like, every hand that touches this should be in the know on why it's important, right? And I think that was one of my takeaways. Like, let's be more diligent. I want myself to be more diligent when I'm on site. I want to be talking to everybody a little bit and pulling back the curtain, right? Here's the goals we're trying to achieve, and everybody got on board, right? As soon as they knew the why. And we don't do that enough. I don't think we do that enough.
How about you, David? What was your biggest lesson learned during this project?
Well, there's always, I spend more of my time on the conceptual design side of things, and that's always a big mix of change. It's all change, the entire. So lessons are learned every single step of the way. I think, to me, the bigger one that I thought was the aha was, and I think we mentioned it before. Well, actually, there's a couple, but we when we thought we were going to put the gym upstairs, and downstairs, and we decided to pull it up. I love the idea of the gym being downstairs, by the way, for all kinds of reasons. I love the idea of coming into the lobby, being able to look over a balcony down at what's happening down. All that had to be thrown out. That whole idea of being able to sort of visually interact. I don't know if you remember that, Shawn, but we had even started doing some renderings of what that could look or feel like. And of course, that all gets thrown out of the window. So this wonderful idea we think we have. But I guess the lesson is, go with it, do what's right for the project, for the site, and for the budget. Bring the gym back up where it belongs. And then the sort of serendipitous, benefit or award of that is the amphitheater we didn't even know we had or didn't know we could do. So, and that's a better benefit in the end. So I guess, to me, the lesson is, never give up. When you have ideas and they get squashed or changed for some reason, there's usually always a silver lining to that, and that's what we discovered on this one as well. I don't know. I think that's the main one that I learned, and I learned that on every project. Honestly, you never get everything you want, but inevitably, what happens is something better comes along the way in the design process, and that's something never to forget in this business.
Yeah, and so I'm a firm believer that even those things that don't make you happy in the moment, that things ultimately, for whatever reason, whatever you choose to believe in your life, happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
That normally, if you don't freak out and don't let it, overwhelm you, and you just navigate it. You're going to find that positive place anyway. You might even find a place that's much better, regardless of what it is. If you just embrace it instead of fight against it.
Exactly.
Stuff's going to happen in this life. It's how you choose to react to it that's going to define what that end thing is going to be.
Exactly.
So absolutely love this project. Now I've got to figure out a way to get to Montana, because I'm going to come see it.
Yeah.
What can we, before I get to my last couple of closing questions, what can we look forward to from Cushing Terrell going forwards? What are you working on right now? What will I be calling you about later to come back and talk to me again?
It's a top secret, though. We can't tell you anything. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. We actually do. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I can start, Shawn, and you can certainly fill in whatever you'd like to. But we're, as you saw at the beginning of this conversation, we're in a lot of locations, so there's a lot of different things going on firm-wide. But locally, at least in the state of Montana, one of the coolest projects we're working on right now is we're doing a really big addition to the Heritage Center Museum in Helena, right on the Capitol grounds there. It's an expansion, and it's a fun project because it is a very large project and a very artful project. And I would recommend it's been under construction for a while. I think we've got at least another year and a half on construction on that one, because it's it's an addition to an already historic building that was built, I think, in the 60s out of white sandstone. And so the addition extends way off to the north, and it's a very, very sculptural project that is meant to evoke really tell the story of the geology and the changing tectonics, literally, of the state of Montana. That sounds complicated, but essentially it's a sculpture representing the movement of Earth and the retraction of glaciers and all these things. And inside it, of course, is a museum representing the people of Montana. So really, I think we'll be back to talk to you about that one. Give us a couple of years to finish it. Very, very interesting project that I think is going to probably draw some attention. It does have, I believe it does have actually pretty aggressive sustainable goals. I'm trying to remember if it's LEED Gold, I think. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening with that project. So just stay tuned on that one. And locally, what else do we have, Shawn? We're working on a project. Dream Adaptive is a cool one up on the ski mountain. That is a project that is, that one would be cool to talk about someday too. It's a project for, basically hosts folks with disabilities, mental or physical disabilities, and helps them learn how to ski, learn how to bike in the summer. And it's a huge project perched on this super steep slope on the ski mountain. And so there's access. We've got to deal with all the access issues with that. But that one's under design right now. And gosh, what else we got going, Shawn?
I'd maybe put a plug in there for the little library, the Big Fork Imagine If Library. That it's tiny, but it's going to be one of the most impactful projects for a little community in the valley here that's desperately needed a public library, and they are doing some wonderfully amazing things with only 6,000 square feet. It's going to be truly amazing, and for that little community, it's going to just be wonderful. I think we're even doing some fun global things with this small rural library. That's right. I know we've been working with I think it's a group called Grace Farms, if I'm getting it correctly, and their claim to fame is kind of this it's called design for freedom, and it's looking at the construction industry, and it's trying to vet products and materials that are void or free of things like slave labor, and tracing it all the way back to the raw materials, not just the product that's assembled here once it but really going back all the way. They certify these products based on even raw materials and where they're getting them from, and the processes and the procedures, and getting to a final usable material and then applying it in these buildings. And I think this little library is going to be a little bit of a pilot project for some of that. And so it's fun to display some of that. Even we have this tendency to go big, right? And the high dollar, the big flashy ones get all the accolades, but this one is going to be a gem, a little bit of a nugget. Something special.
I love that little library in Big Fork.
Yeah.
It's like, the minute you said big fork, I'm picturing this library building shaped like a fork. But, sometimes, and I've said this before on the podcast as well, sometimes it's the little things we do that make the biggest ripples. I love to say to people all the time, go big or go home. That's almost like part of my DNA. But sometimes the way you go big is by small things.
Yeah,
for sure.
So, well, you guys are, unfortunately for you, you are now on my radar. So you can run, but you can't hide. I'll be coming for you again. So what is your opinion, just your personal opinion, on what you see as the top challenges facing architecture today? Like if you were asked, if you could pick one thing that you really think we need to improve, or is really challenging for you in today's day and age, what are those top challenges that you think we're facing, as opposed to, I could list 100 things that were a big deal 30 years ago and aren't now, but other things are challenging now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could start again, Shawn, if you don't mind. I had a
Please do.
An awesome question. And I will say, the one that Shawn touched on related to child and slave labor, that is a really, really interesting topic. And I have a feeling that's going to make waves, because that is a real problem. And you'd be surprised what traces of elements go into anything that you're using or touching right now that probably could be traced back to somebody who used a slave or a child to get it. That's huge. And so I think that movement is gonna start to make a difference, and I think it's going to make a difference in thousands of people's lives. So that's something to consider. I think sustainability for our industry is also something that, I mean, it's huge, but I think it isn't huge enough. I think that it needs to become, and not the exception or the one thing that's exceptional. I think it needs to be commonplace. I think it needs to be something that, I think net zero has to happen sooner than later. It's just our responsibility. If you know how much energy is used by buildings worldwide, I think it would stagger you, and we can do so much better. But economics drive a lot of that. I think to me, sustainability is huge. We just need to get far. It's in our industry. It feels like we haven't had a technological quantum leap in a while. It feels like we've been using the same stuff the same way for the most part, right? For 150 years. I mean, we've had better and improved materials. We've done things different. We detail things better and differently now, but it still seems like it's the same sort of kit of Legos, if you will. Isn't it kind of odd when you think of it that way, that we're kind of still doing it the same way for the most part? It's like we need a quantum leap in technology, and I can think of one that's started to happen. Maybe you've heard of it. Like there's buildings down now in Austin that are essentially a 3D printed concrete. Have you seen that? Jerk Engel's group out of Denmark designed them. I forget who the builder was, but it's essentially a 3D printed homes with like a concrete mixed material. It's absolutely brilliant. That is a quantum leap. And I think that we are due for more of those if we're going to keep doing what we want to do in the way we want to do it. Because it feels like we're kind of running out of options with conventional design. I don't have the answer to that one, but I think that the people that are focusing on innovation in construction and materials in this industry are going to, they are the ones that are going to win. I'm really looking forward to working with some of those new Legos, if you will. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think, David, I mean, I like where you're going, and you're pushing the future in technology and materials, and I might even swing the pendulum back further the other direction and go a little classical. I think one of the things that really bugs me about our industry is so often I feel like our profession can unfortunately get reduced to just aesthetics and trends. And it's too easily the verbiage that, oh, as an architect, all you do is pick colors and materials, right? And I just, that's not the case, and it can't get that reduced. I think back of the architects of old, right, who were classically trained, and they embodied poetry, symbolism, and playing with light and shadow, and these things that make these environments so much more meaningful and purposeful. And I think this building that have been talking about today is one of those good examples, ripe with a lot of that I would hope the industry continues to push for. I think there's so much more meaning and purpose in poetry, and I think it gets, unfortunately, undervalued in our profession, and we get gridlocked into this. Well, what's trendy and what's aesthetic? Well, define aesthetic, right? I don't. Sometimes those deeper philosophical questions, I think, get lost, and that's really where our profession can excel. And the magic and powerful part projects come from that. And so I guess I kind of go classical with it. I want to kind of see a resurgence of some of that.
Well, I think, I can relate to that too, because in anything, not just architecture, but particularly also in architecture, fashion, whatever, when all you think about, like, I have an amazing black dress in my closet that I have had for over 20 years, and it is still an amazing black dress, and it is still a dress I could wear to anything. And it has never once gone out of style.
Right.
Whereas you can walk into some buildings and I can tell you exactly what era that building was built. Being trendy, good design and classic design and simplicity and elegance. Simple is better for me. I don't like super busy, crazy stuff, but we have lost a lot of that. What's the hot new thing? As opposed to what's the thing that will be impressive 40 years from now.
Yeah.
And you're not starting look to make like that was designed in the 70s.
You're starting to make me tear up over here. That's awesome. I think what we're saying, we're all kind of saying similar thing. I totally agree. It's interesting that you mentioned it, because in many ways, I've always imagined that the best architecture is not so much, architecture or building. It's really sculpture. It's something you're supposed to experience. It's something you're supposed to experience, over time. And so, to your point, if it is something you can peg as a period of time, I don't know that it's as successful as something that is literally just a three-dimensional sculpture that you can experience and appreciate. The difference on the other end of that scale is architecture at all. Anything that's just four walls and a roof is a building to me. There really isn't any thought or design to it. When you take it to the level of artfulness, and you can be subjective to decide which one is beautiful and which one isn't, but at least thought's been put into it. They're trying to evoke an emotion, or you're trying to tell a story with that. And if that's the case, it starts to ascend to the level of architecture, because at least it's someone's put thought into it. They're trying to say something with the architecture. So I think I can't disagree with you, Shawn. I think we need more of that. I think economy and speed has pushed a lot of architecture to be buildings, to be honest with you.
You're right.
That's unfortunate. But the truth is, I think architects are trained to be problem solvers. They're trained to listen and decipher, and then create something that is hopefully artful in the end. But I agree with you. There's a pressure to do the opposite, but I think it's our job to hang on and keep fighting the good fight.
Well, I'm hopelessly optimistic, but I firmly believe we can have both.
Yeah.
Not every building's going to be the Taj Mahal, but I think that you can fit within a budget and schedule and still have a meaningful building if you are thoughtfully chasing that.
Well, in fact, those are the projects actually that are the most wonderful of all, is if you can do all of that and not have, all the land in the world and have all the budget in the world. In fact, the Big Ford Library is a good example of that, Shawn. Very small. So the solution needs to be clever. It needs to be intelligent, and it needs to be economical. And sometimes when you have all those constraints, the end result is that much more of a celebration, really. So, yeah.
So my final question, this is the easiest question of the day.
Oh, sure.
I'm totally lying to you. Every guest gets this question, just so you know I'm not picking on you. As human beings, we all hope that our actions in this life will in some way make the world a better place. Big things, little things. We all want to make a difference. I would like to hope we all want to make a difference. For me personally, I call my personal mission to make a difference in the world I have access to or that I can touch, my personal world domination statement. And that's my plan to make a difference in my world. So my question for you is, personal or professional, how do you as an individual hope to make an impact in this world? What is your personal world domination statement? Easy question.
Go ahead, Shawn, because then I have time to think.
You threw me right in.
Deflect.
All right,
deflect.
You know what? We just spent a chunk of time here talking about architecture and some of the fun and impressive things we've gotten to do, and I feel like these are impactful. What we do as architects shapes environments, shapes worlds. Is it world domination? I don't know. How many people are going to experience these buildings and how long will they last? It's certainly something, right? But I think I recognize my ability to impact and my immediate sphere of influence is fairly small. I think I would lean personal here, and I would say that probably the most meaningful thing I can do is be a good husband and a father. And I think in that order. And as long as I do that well, architect or anything else, I think will follow suit. Hopefully that is impactful and it ripples down the chain of time and a legacy of longevity, and our efforts well spent.
Now you're going to make me cry.
Yeah, me too.
I love that. No. I
And
know. Gosh, knock it off.
The worst part is you stole my answer, so I can't even use it. I'm just kidding. I can't
say something about
disagree with
Lewis behind you.
you. Yeah, to be a good father to my dog back there. No. Yeah, no. I mean, you hit on a good one. Just to be a good human is important. To be a good father because you are spreading. And I've got a bunch of kids too. So I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, it is all about making sure you're raising your kids well, and you're honoring your loved one. In this case, my wife, and so I focus on that as well, Shawn. Personal. In fact, I can't even think of a better way to have impact. Professionally, though, I mean, I think architects are trained, and we talked about this today, to try to solve problems that affect people's lives. Hopefully, lots of people. Shawn, I think the project we worked on here today, over the course of time, will affect thousands of people, and in a good way, I hope, right? I mean, and that is impactful. We are lucky to have that opportunity as architects to be able to do that. I actually think the place that, as architects, that we could probably have the most impact, and this is something we touched on as well, is shelter in general. And you mentioned it, Cherise, as well. Shelter is it's a profound problem across the planet, right? It's getting worse and worse. I think the difference between the haves and the have-nots in the United States alone has gotten so much worse, and the sort of the missing middle that's there. I mean, we have teachers, we have people in law enforcement, we have all folks that really can't even afford to buy a home right now. That's wrong. We have to figure out how to solve that in some manner. But shelter in general, I think across the planet, if I could change anything, if I could use these talents for good, and this is something I'd like to focus on in the remaining years that I have, I'd like to figure out how to create economical, high quality housing, particularly in third world countries, places that don't have it right now. There is a solution to this. And I think design is part of the answer. But economical and appropriate, and I would say quick solutions are what we need. I don't have the answer right now, but it's something we've been even talking about internally, is how do we take what we know and do something good with it that affects people across the planet. That's something that I would, if we could do anything, that's something that I would love to focus on. Because we've been given these talents for a reason. Let's figure out how to use them for the greater good, and not just for the extremely wealthy or for whatever it happens to be. We need to learn how to use these talents to affect the most people we possibly can. So that's a mission I'd like to figure out if we could in the coming years.
Well,
maybe it's that 3D printing you had, David. That's a good idea. Maybe you could go 3D print. You don't need the amount of skilled labor or all of the workforce.
Do it. If you're saying let
get over there with a 3D printer. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Well, go listen to my Homes for Hope episode. I think that you'll find, as far as really forward-thinking things going on with robots and 3D printing and that kind of thing that are actually making a difference.
Really?
I think you'll love some of that. And statistics show very solidly that the biggest single game changer in improving somebody's life is having stable housing.
Right.
And all the other things start falling into place in most cases. And in not just because there's this place, but because of how that affects a human being and having a safe, stable place to live. That bleeds into everything else that person needs to do, whether it's, finding work or whatever it is going on in their lives.
Yep.
So I think that's a worthwhile, very worthwhile endeavor. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I went way over time. I so apologize for that, but it's such a great conversation. I couldn't cut it off. I really appreciate you joining me today.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you for having us.